Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and welcome to your Wednesday edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberley Hoeppner, and today is October 8th, 2014. When we're not here on air, you can always go look at our information at www.arh.noaa.gov, or you can call our weather information line at 1-800-472-0391. And as always, we're on the internet on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And in just a moment here, we're going to be talking about your aviation, public, and marine forecast. Now on to the hot topics of the day. We do have blizzard warnings still remaining out across the eastern part of the Brooks Range and along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Okay, this is for the stronger gusty winds between 30 and 40 miles per hour with gusts possibly up to 55 miles per hour, with snow occurring along the low pressure system that's in the northeast here. This is going to cause some reduced visibilities down to 1/4 mile or less at times, and this is just running out through this evening at 6 p.m. and then things should be on the tapering off with the winds as we head late into your evening hours. Now looking at the weather that's on your way, we have a low pressure system, a well-developed mature low that's just circulating just to the south of the Dutch Harbor area. Now you can watch this spinning around and pulling some moisture. A front has been across the southern part of the Bering for the last several days, and putting into motion one more time, you can see there's a lot of moisture that's just streaming on ahead of this low pressure. Now as we look at a frame closer to home, notice that the front is draped from the western part of the Alaska Peninsula back towards the area west on the Bering, and then we have another frontal surge that's pushing up, and this low pressure system is combined with the with a lower pressure system, and this surface low and the upper low are going to be moving, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But real quick feature here across the southern part of the Gulf, we had a front that moved up to here through the southeast yesterday, brings some scattered shower activity across the southeast, and there's some more moisture. Put this into motion, you'll see that pushing up towards the southeast. Mainly dry conditions continuing across the eastern part of the Bering and across the northern areas with low pressure. Mainly across the state, we have some low clouds that are drifting to the south. Taking a look at the surface map today, here's that front that's draped across the southeastern areas of the Gulf of Alaska, and this will bring some rain activity, and we'll be on to that in just a moment. For now, there's some scattered shower activity, or I'm sorry, some light showers that are pushing towards the mainland, and these showers are falling in the form of rain just off the coast and change over to snow as you head further inland. A weak disturbance across the area is causing these showers to move up, and then we have this other low pressure system that's pulling a cooler, denser air mass towards the south. So between those two systems, we're seeing shower activity all across the eastern half of Alaska today. Here's the occlusion that's sitting out along the Aleutian chain, pushing up towards the Alaska Peninsula. Gusty winds between 30 and 40 miles per hour with higher gusts reported up to 69 this morning across Dutch Harbor. Some light shower activity across the southern half of the Bering, and some gustier winds have tapered off towards the extreme western bearing. Looking at your forecast for tonight, this low pressure system will start to make a slow progress towards the east, moving into the western bearing by the early morning hours on Thursday. So we'll see some gusty winds along the frontal boundary between 30 and 40 miles per hour. And then as you head up towards the Shelikof Strait area, Western Gulf, expect between 35 and 45 miles per hour with possible wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Also, wind gusts will be picking up across the southeastern areas as this front makes its way across the southeast, bringing some rainfall into the areas overnight. Light shower activity staying across all the southern coastal areas as a weak disturbance remains over this area, and lighter snow showers across the central part of Alaska and towards the northeast. Some light shower activity continuing with also some patchy fog conditions developing across the upper Yukon Valley there. Now across the northwest, expect some light snow showers here, and then along the eastern part of the Bering, still quiet conditions, but the winds are going to be picking up all along the west coast here with some light rain activity across the central areas, with the heaviest rain along the low pressure system that's moving to the north. This is going to be a 955 millibar low, and then as it heads towards the north tomorrow, it'll slowly weaken, but it'll surely have an impact of winds all across the Gulf waters. The southeast will see quite a bit of rainfall, between 2 and 4 inches, locally higher totals up to 5 inches. So areas that have seen snow, they'll possibly see a melting, so this may be a concern with the runoff. And as we have this warmer air mass that's pushing up towards the northern part of the Gulf, a changeover of precipitation from rain to snow inland. But as this makes further progress during the day on Thursday, we should see everything change over to rain, but it's going to be a slow progression. The main front is still well down to the south across here, the western part of the Gulf of Alaska, and back towards the eastern part of the Aleutians. Now, with this being said, there is going to be a possible chance as we head late into the day on Thursday, as those temperatures are going to remain very cold at the surface. However, it's going to be warming as this system just moves in aloft. Across the remainder of the state, it will be a little bit quieter across the northern areas with some light snow and patchy fog mainly. High pressure will be retreating back towards the west. Along the Bering Strait, we'll see some winds beginning to increase with light snow showery activity and a stronger northerly wind developing. Across the western part of the Bering, expect lighter shower activity and winds tapering off through the day on Thursday. Now, looking at your Friday forecast, this low pressure system is going to advance up towards the southern Gulf, bring gusty winds again another day for the Gulf waters, with the rain activity staying mainly along the coast and another swath heading up towards the southern part of the Gulf. Along the western areas of the state, some gusty winds will continue behind the backside of this low pressure system, so expect winds to stay out of the north between 20 and 30 miles per hour with higher gusts to 35 miles per hour. Further inland, expect a possible changeover again here from snow to rain as this warmer system moves north, so we'll need to keep an eye on the central areas of the state. However, the low pressure system will be bringing some weak disturbances across the north, so snow stays in the forecast, light with patchy fog, and then across the northwestern areas, very gusty winds will develop once again across the northwest, and they will continue to gust out of the north all across the Bering and the Aleutian chain. Looking at your temperatures for today, it was actually warmest in Annette in the southeast, with temperatures warming up to 55 at Annette. Elsewhere, it was pretty much in the mid-40s to lower 50s as you head towards the Dixon entrance. Gulf waters were mainly in the mid-40s. The interior areas stayed very cold with the front that pushed through. So temperatures here were in the mid-20s, and along the coastal areas in the mid to upper 20s, with warmer temperatures along the west coast in the mid to upper 30s. And then looking at your southwestern areas, only climbing up into the lower 30s, with the mid-40s across the Aleutians, and a high of 50 near Adak area. Now looking at your temperatures for tonight, temperatures are going to drop into the mid-30s to mid-40s across the southeast. So another chilly night before that warm air mass makes it up, and it's along the Gulf waters. Expect temperatures to drop once again down into the lower 30s with teens across the entire central interior parts of the state. A little bit warmer even across the north, though, in the mid-20s with 30s, near 30 until you drop down towards the Seward Peninsula, and then a very cold change through the southwest and Bristol Bay in the lower 20s. Across the chain, expect temperatures, not much variation with that warm front there. They'll stay in the mid-40s. And then looking at your temperatures tomorrow, a very similar temperature profile across the Bering Aleutians in the mid to upper 40s. Across the southwestern areas of the state, beginning to warm with a warm front in the upper 30s to lower 40s all across much of the Gulf waters, and with temperatures warming up into the mid to upper 50s with the warm front that's moving across the southeast tomorrow. However, the rain might keep those temperatures from getting into the mid 50s for much of the area. They'll stay into the upper 40s as you head north and in the upper elevations. Now across the central areas, expect temperatures to climb in the upper 20s and lower 30s, with the upper 20s across the northern coast. Along the west coast, mainly in the mid 30s to upper 30s until you get down to Bristol Bay, where they're going to see temperatures near 40. Looking at your flying weather for tomorrow, with this large low pressure system, we'll see widespread MVFR conditions all the way through the Aleutians, with IFR conditions across the Gulf waters, as that low pressure system will also affect the Alaska Peninsula IFR, and possibly IFR across parts of the southeast as that system comes through, and MVFR across the southeast. Along the northern areas, expect widespread IFR conditions along the east and MVFR across the remainder of the north and northwest coast. Looking at your passes in more depth, VFR at the lower part of the Brooks Range, MVFR through the pass, and IFR to the north. And same for Adigan Pass, we'll see VFR and MVFR and IFR to the north of the range. So looking at your Merrill and Clark Pass, they will go VFR to MVFR in the day with that system. And Rainy Pass will go VFR to MVFR. Windy Pass, VFR. Isabel, MVFR. Mentasta, MVFR. Tanita Pass will also be VFR, and then Portage will go MVFR. Looking at Chilkoot and White Pass, MVFR. And then your freezing levels tomorrow will be hugging the west coast and along the Gulf waters. That will be warming. We see 2,000 to 8,000 feet across the Gulf waters right now, and 2,000 to 4,000 as things begin to cool across the Bering, 6,000 across the Aleutian chain. Looking at your icing, mainly below 10,000 with possible moderate conditions across the northern Gulf, below 10,000, and below 4,000 across the north, light icing here. Jet stream tomorrow will be mainly out of the west across the area with a faster jet speed just to the south of the Aleutians. This low pressure system will see very fast wind speeds between 35 and 40 knots across the Gulf waters, and out of the northeast between 25 and 30 knots with the highest speeds closer to the center of the low. And looking at your 3,000 feet winds, more of a easterly flow across the area, 40 to 50 knots across the center of that low pressure system. And the turbulence will mainly be associated with the low pressure, with occasional to moderate across the Alaska Peninsula, and a possible severe area across the Barren Islands and back towards the Alaska Peninsula. We'll be right back with your marine forecast.
Weather balloons here at Fairbanks International Airport are released by the Weather Service twice a day, and the timing of those releases are such that they are coordinated with all the other releases around the world. And that data then, which provides a vertical profile of temperature and relative humidity and pressure in the atmosphere, is then integrated into the forecast models run by the Weather Service.
How can you forecast the temperatures when an inversion is present? It is a difficult puzzle. In Fairbanks, often the weather forecast says today, clear skies, high temperatures from 20 below to 10 above, coldest in the valley and mildest in the hills. A 30-degree range. This is not uncommon in the interior winter. It's a difficult puzzle to try to put very precise numbers. We need a broad range because within that shallow layer, you go from such cold temperatures to such warm temperatures. That's just the way it is here in the inhabited elevations of interior Alaska. Well, anything you want to forecast, including a temperature inversion, has to be studied. You have to learn how the inversion works in order to forecast its future behavior. And part of learning how it works involves gathering data. And every day out at the Fairbanks International Airport, a weather balloon is launched. On the end of the balloon is a thermometer, up it goes, and we get the vertical profile of temperature in the atmosphere. And that's real good data. You can see the inversion with that. Problem is, the weather balloon only goes up twice a day. And for forecasting, detecting and forecasting the jet stream, which operates on broad spatial and temporal scales, twice a day is, for most purposes, adequate. However, down here in this fine spatial scale right in urban Fairbanks, we need more than twice a day to really understand the inversion, especially its formation and its dissipation.
So the weather balloons that are released at Fairbanks International are timed with all those other global releases, and they are not actually at times which are very dynamically active here in Fairbanks, which is another reason that we're interested in doing this experiment with an aircraft and also additional weather balloon releases to sample some of those more dynamically active times of the day.
Basically, in preparing the sondes, you have to take the sonde out of the package, prepare the sensors, and then you'll fill up the weather balloon, then need to calibrate the instrument inside. So that's the most important part of balloon preparation. So when we're calibrating the instrument, we make sure that the temperature of the sensor is realistic with the temperature either of the room or outside, wherever the sonde is being calibrated, as well as pressure, making sure that's at our level, and also the relative humidity, that looks realistic. We use these weather balloons that when they're filled up with helium, they're approximately 6 feet wide. And by the time that they reach the top of the atmosphere where the balloon pops, they're about 20 feet wide. So they're huge. It's hard to even imagine. After we get clearance from the FAA, we'll go outside, take the radio sonde, attach it to the balloon, and then make sure there aren't any planes going by just in case, and let her go. And the computer inside actually picks up the signal automatically. It'll tell you exactly when the balloon was launched, and the data will come processing in from there. After we launch the balloon, I'll go back inside the building and to make sure that the data that's coming in on the computer looks realistic, making sure the pressure decreases with height, the relative humidities look realistic, and in my cases, looking at temperature inversion, that the temperature is increasing with height. Typically in the atmosphere, we see temperature decreasing with height, but in these special cases, that's what I'm looking for. And then I can watch as the temperature progresses vertically into the atmosphere, as that sensor's rising, and I can see where the top of the inversion layer is. So the National Weather Service currently launches weather balloons twice a day, but I wanted to launch weather balloons more frequently than that to see what was happening between those launches. So I wanted to take a look at what's happening between that 4 p.m. launch and that 4 a.m. launch, and then what's happening between the 4 a.m. and the 4 p.m. So I launched these weather balloons every 2 to 3 hours to gain a better temporal resolution of what's going on in the atmosphere.
Our research asked the question, what will surface-based temperature inversions look like in Alaska over the next 100 years? And the primary tool for studying future projections are global climate models. In fact, they're the only tool. But they're not perfect for answering our question because we're interested in information over a city landscape scale, which is a few miles, 5 miles, 10 miles. Global climate models provide information on a 100-mile scale. So we need to get that information from this coarse scale and downscale it to a higher resolution so it's useful for us. And the way we do that is we take climate information from the global climate model and we feed it into our regional model, which has a domain over Alaska at a resolution of, say, a few miles instead of hundreds of miles. And the large-scale climate comes from these global climate models, and then we run our simulation over Alaska. We have done regional downscaling simulations for 20 years in the 20th century, from 1979 to 1999. We've done 10 years from 2010 to 2019, and then from 2050 to 2059, and 2090 to 2099. So with the regional model, we've taken these 4 slices over time, fed by the global climate model. And what we find, first of all, in the 20th century simulation is that the regional model does a much better job of simulating the vertical surface-based temperature inversions over Fairbanks and the other cities in Alaska. And as we go through the 21st century, those 3 other slices, as the global climate warms, we find that the temperature inversions in the lowest layer don't really change in strength. The strength stays the same, but the whole profile gets warmer. So this study provides a first look at what would be happening to temperature inversions in the future. We need to ask other questions like, how will this frequency change? Will they occur as often? Will the season be much shorter? There's a variety of other questions we need to ask to develop a better picture for how temperature inversions will change in the future. And our first cut answer that we have suggests that we'll still have to worry about the same sort of air quality issues, because in the near surface, the strength of the inversion will be about the same.
Hi, and welcome back. And looking at your sea ice, it's about 75 nautical miles north the sea ice line from Barrow, and then we have the ice is continuing to grow. Updated maps bring it all the way back towards Point Lay. Now looking at your marines across the southeast, we have a southerly flow across the outer waters tomorrow between 30 and 35 knots with gales towards the Yakutat area, and then increasing gusty winds through the day out of the north across the inner channels, except out of the southeast along the Dixon entrance area, Clarence Strait. And then looking at your seas, we'll see seas between 9 and 12 feet, highest seas to the north here, and then the inner channels will be between 4 and 5 feet. Looking at your Friday forecast, winds will be tapering down just a bit, so small craft across much of the area out of the southland southeast, with a northerly flow across the northern Lynn Canal at 15 knots. Inner channels will see 3 to 5 foot seas, and the outer waters will be between 12 and 14 feet on Friday. Looking at the western areas of the Gulf, we'll see storm force winds across the Barren Islands area, around 50 knots out of the northeast, and then along the Shelikof Strait as well. Elsewhere, mainly gale warnings out for between 30 and 40 miles per hour across the Gulf waters, and then along the Prince William Sound out of the northeast at 20, and Cook Inlet will be around 30 knots. And then we'll see seas between around 4 feet across the Prince William Sound, and then 15 to 19 feet across the western areas of the Gulf waters, and then along the Shelikof Strait, Barren Islands area between 12 and 19 feet highest along the Shelikof Strait, 7 to 14 feet across the Cook Inlet, and highest seas to the south there. On your Friday, we'll see those winds tapering off very quickly, especially across the western Gulf areas between 15 and 20 knots along the Kodiak Island, and then small craft advisory along the northern waters out of the east and southeast. Along the Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait, expect a northeasterly flow between 25 and 30 knots with small craft advisory here, and seas between 5 and 8 feet, except the Gulf waters will be between 12 and 18 feet, and we'll see 4 feet across the Prince William Sound. Looking at your Alaska Peninsula, we'll see gale strength winds, max gale strength along the Bering side between 35 and 45 knots. And they'll be all out of the northeast direction, 11 to 17 foot seas across the Bering, with 18 to 20 across the Pacific waters. As we head into your Friday, it'll become a northwesterly flow between 25 and 30 knots, small craft advisory, 14 to 16 foot seas on the Bering side, and 11 to 21 feet across the Pacific side. Looking at your winds across the Aleutians, we'll see max gale strength across the eastern Aleutians be around 45 knots, all out of the north across the Aleutians, with gale criteria for the remainder, except far out to the west where it tapers down to small craft advisory here, and seas would be between 22 and 27 feet across the Bering, with 22 to 24 feet across the Pacific side. Looking at your Friday forecast, northerly flow, all small craft across the area, 16 to 20 foot seas across the entire area. Now looking at your Thursday forecast, a gale criteria across the west coastal areas between 30 and 40 knots, mainly a little bit lighter wind speeds there towards the St. Lawrence Islands. Seas here on this day will be between 9 and 10 feet along the west coast, and then 14 to 20 feet as you head towards the central areas of the Bering. Looking at a northerly flow, gale staying across the western areas, seas would be between 12 and 16 feet. And then the Arctic coast will see a northerly flow with the strongest winds across the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, heavy freezing spray on this day, and then we'll see a lighter wind speed towards the Kotzebue Sound, 15 to 20 knots. Lighter wind speed setting up for your Friday, still out of the north and strongest out of the Kotzebue Sound, with seas between 5 and 10 feet. Looking at a recap, this front will be moving towards the Gulf, a mix of rain and snow along the northern Gulf, rain in the south. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.